Hello, everyone. This is your Tiny Desk presentation for our theme this week, which is listening. And some of you are reading a book on listening. Almost all your books have some component of conversation. So there's a lot of people that are, and we're in a specific time where we're getting a lot of information about it. And I put some videos up, but if this topic is really interesting to you, I also find it really interesting, and I want you to know that I like teaching listening as a skill and putting emphasis on it in my conversation classes, which is one of the reasons why you have a conversation assignment in this class. This is a skill. It takes time to develop who you are, habits and patterns that we've fallen into. We're impacted by our culture. We're impacted by our childhood experiences or previous relationships that we've had, whether it's familial type of relationships or workplace situations where we've developed these patterns and basically, I would say, survival skills to get our point in there, and this kind of competitive feeling that I need to get talking to be heard, because often once people get the microphone, they don't like to give it up. And if I'm asking you to be a listener, that means you're handing over the microphone and you may not get it back. Some people do not understand how to have a true dialogue. And there's a lot of things about this that are complex. And when I use the word complex with this, I'm really talking about the fact that it's driven by context, and each person, you have a different relationship dimension that's impacting it, and you have uh, different power dynamics that are influencing that dialogue. There's so many things. That's what makes it complex, that each conversation is completely unique. Even if you feel like you have had this conversation over and over again with the same person, every conversation is completely unique into itself. That we call that a communication event. Just like if you've been in a snowstorm before in the past, and then a snowstorm comes along, or more of an ice storm, whatever it is, each one is completely unique. We use the past as a way to try and unpack and deconstruct what's happening us to in the moment. But it's really important to remember the past is the past. That was different. And this is a unique situation. I would say that would be the very first thing to remind yourself of, that each situation is completely unique, and to come at it, that means I'm asking you to come into the conversation with more awareness, whether there's two types of awareness that you want to be holding on to, which is really, really difficult. Why it's a skill. You need self-awareness, and then you need this perception and othered awareness of what's happening around you. And that's happening in different layers of focus and how we focus, which is why week one, I had a podcast about focus, because when we get to this part of business communication, we want to think about what is happening in a conversation and how can we focus on listening? How can we do that? So we're going to really focus on developing that as a skill. We have a lot of issues and problems and obstacles which might pop up as I talk about this, but I really want to think about yourself as a listener for most of this Tiny Desk presentation. So, whether they give you the mic back or not, we want to think about healthy conversations need listening. And that means that we need to think about, what are we doing when the other person is talking? What are you doing? What are your nonverbals? How do you vocalize? Uh, Now, even though eye contact is important as a way to stay connected and to engage, and it doesn't have to be constant for you to be an effective listener. And in fact, we know that we actually can take in information with more dimension and thoughtfulness with when we have less eye contact. So you need a balance between eye contact to show that you are engaged and your attention isn't just going to be yeah, go ahead and talk. I'm listening. Right. Like we don't want this type of way that we are othered engaged, especially with electronic devices constantly with notifications. Oh, I got a notification just when I picked up my phone, right? Like we want to make sure that these things aren't drawing our eyes away because in an attention way, but maybe we have a downcastness to our eyes to take in information, or maybe we walk and talk. It's often, especially in the field of business, we notice that activity-driven conversations have more productivity to them, and it's often why there's kind of a stereotype of like in TV shows, there's the walk and talk shot where they're going down a hallway and they have the dialogue and the sparring going on as they're walking and then they go their separate ways. That's really to mimic uh, this engagement that we do when we're listening, when we can actually not have as much demand for I am listening to you and making eye contact. If you're just focused on making eye contact through a conversation the whole time, your mind will be more interested in am I making eye contact than really content listening to what is the substance of what the other person is saying? Is this other person saying something that isn't clear to me that I need more information about? Or how are they building their point or their reasoning? Is there logical connections from one point to the next, right? That type of content listening to be curious and to listen in a way that I need to learn something. I don't know the answer and I need to listen in a way to get new information to learn in a different way. We would say that that type of listening, uh, driven by content, that's why we say you don't have to be sealed into eye contact to do it. And I only bring that up because there's a lot of kind of stereotypes like, look at me when I'm talking to you, or I mean, we are constantly obsessed with making eye contact as a way of evidence or proof that you are engaged. Now, the reason is that because the nonverbal use of our eyes, whether it's being grabbed attention from a device, from paperwork, shiny objects, or distractions, uh, we need to remember that there we need a balance of how we're using our eyes to connect with the other person. Another way to think about it is if you've ever been watching a TV show or an event with someone and you see something that is funny, maybe you laugh at something, one of the first things we do is we look to the people around us to make this kind of fleeting eye contact of agreement. This was funny. And if we are trying to engage in that type of fleeting eye contact of camaraderie and the other person is not, we slowly start to diminish, and this is unconscious, but we diminish our trust with the other person and we lose connection with them over time. And these are like subtle processes that happen. It's often, there's a lot of research now with kids and the importance of eye contact that when babies or kids, they're trying to make that eye contact connection with the adults around them. And if the adult who is their main taker over time doesn't return that fleeting eye contact or that smile or that reciprocity of nonverbals, that the child slowly gauges less and less interest in whatever is happening. And they actually kind of move into a kind of stale stare and won't engage as much without that humanness. So, what babies and kids teach us about these kind of fleeting needs for eye contact, we need to become aware of how we're doing it, or are we always engaged with other things? And this is a very Oh, it is such a tempting device to constantly tap it. Did I get a notice? 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 But what we know about that is there's no way to be fully engaged as a listener if you don't have the ability to maintain that focus. It's one of the reasons why in the pandemic, when all of our business became Zoom or these kind of video platform, FaceTiming, which really demands this face-to-face interaction, and it makes us feel like we're doing eye contact, but then we're not doing eye contact. Or if we turn off our videos, I'll just turn mine off. Boop. There's me and my husband. That without that, that kind of created a different type of nonverbal pressure that we weren't used to when we were just sitting side by side in a conference room and we did an occasional glance over. But the truth is, we were not always engaged in that immediate framing of having that eye contact. It's also why stereotypes about business happening kind of after the conference meeting around the big table, that all of a sudden we meet in the parking lot with just a couple people and we have this more casual encounter that actually feels more productive as we walk out to the parking lot and we are standing next to our cars, somehow those conversations almost feel more productive. And that's because of the activity piece of the conversation. There's also the golfing, the business happening while golfing, and this is a very big influence in the world of business. And and why golfing really helps with helping with getting business deals done or learning about each other and building trust is because of its activity driven, and it's kind of developed this stereotype of impacting how we engage in self-disclosure. I think, and also what I like about golfing, I'm not a golfer, but why it's so important in the field of business is because there's these pauses that happen. And in golf, there's this kind of quiet moment where we are waiting for the person to make their swing. Everything's supposed to be really quiet. That kind of gives you a chance to do your own processing and thinking, where often the competitive element of conversations uh, you know, they mean that we're supposed to be going fast and we have to overlap and demand, and I have a point that's better than your point. Well, I already knew that point, and we have these kind of hierarchical upscaling of the conversation where we don't really feel like anyone's listening. We just feel like we're trying to get our point in there. And the pauses in golf have fed the business world well because of the pause, because of that pausing. And of course, golfing is very problematic because they happen in these kind of country club situations that have historically been exclusive to one segment of the population. They have not often allowed women in, people from different minority groups, of people of color, different religious groups like Jewish people have been purposefully excluded from that world. And unfortunately, this really effective activity where business was allowed, the exclusionary nature of that sport has limited the upward fight mobility and the need for those kind of activity, casual conversations to build trust and credibility have not been people haven't had, not everyone's had access to that world. And unfortunately, that's put golf where it has in this place of almost having a place of injury, of cultural injury for some groups of people. Okay, so back to the anatomy of a conversation. We want to, again, we're focusing on ourselves as a listener and what kind of listener we are. So how do you do reciprocity? So I share something and then the other person shares something, right? This is what we are expecting a dialogue. And turn-taking signals is when do we jump in. Reciprocity is the content of what we share in reply to another person. Now, some people, how are we going to say this? So some people are looking for equity in the conversation. So if some person shares, this happened to me, or I know this, someone is going to come in and share, oh, I know that, or oh, I understand what happened because that happened to me. And then they launch into their own story. This type of reciprocity, of course, has advantages and disadvantages depending on the situation. It depends how long someone holds onto the mic and the emotional content of the story before. Uh, for example, this isn't a business story, but my dog passed away last year, and I really liked this type of reciprocity when someone would tell me a story of when their dog passed away because I was feeling overwhelmed by the feeling of grief and guilt and could I have done more? And then hearing other people's stories helped me kind of balance my experience by handing the mic over. I really liked it, but that's not true for everybody in that experience. We don't want to fall into conversational narcissism where we're giving reciprocity in a way all of a sudden to talk about me and my story. And now you are emotionally having to take care of me. Uh, and that's different. That's a different type of reciprocity that almost looks the same as that. So recognizing, are we grabbing the mic in a way so now you have to take care of me? Or am I grabbing the mic in a way to give a story that mirrors so that you don't feel alone in your experience and then get the mic back to the other person? And that's where the people who are reading the Smart Brevity book can really help us with how do you create a reciprocity that is poignant, specific to the point, and getting back to the other person, like either with a question or something that allows the other person to add another layer. So this is one type of reciprocity, um, creating equity in the conversation. Some people will start off, a really dysfunctional conversation will be to start off with getting the other person to start. I'm going to ask you a question and get you to tell a story because I really just want to talk about my story. That would be a different type of conversational starting that can move into really dysfunctional uh, listening. Someone you've asked someone to do reciprocity just so you can talk. And were you really so? How we would avoid that is I have a really important question to ask. I have an experience that I want to talk about, but I really want to understand your perspective. So when someone's talking and you get the mic back, are you really responding to what they say? If you're listening, you're like, oh, you might have a question about what they're saying. What was that like? Oh, gosh, that reminds me of something that happened to me, but yours sounds different, and then asking a follow-up question. So, how much are you getting the mic back to the other person? And how are you demonstrating with your reciprocity that you're actually listening or heard what that other person said? That usually means with some type of perception statement or some type of story-based question, where you're asking for more details or more specifics or drilling down on a specific moment to expand the conversation. Hmm. The other type of reciprocity would be the one where we are moving up like a ladder. And this can have a playful advantage to it, but it also can end up feeling like you're just in a conversation competition and we're not really getting anywhere. So I know this, well, I knew that, and I know this. Oh, well, I knew that already. And I know this. Well, I knew this and this. Or what about this? And this kind of moving up the ladder this way, till there's no more ladder left and we never really hurt each other. Uh, oh, if someone's so one of the remedies for this is again how we do reciprocity in a way that goes, oh, well, I have heard of that. Where did you get, but I can't remember where I knew that from. Where do you know your information from? Like really getting, not in a challenging way, that almost sounds a little bit challenging, but really just getting to kind of platform it out a little. But this latter is deeply cultural. The cultural piece of it comes from the competitive world of business and the need to have facts and knowledge and solutions right at the ready, to jump in and be the one that's heard. And if you're in a really competitive environment, there's not a lot of solutions. That usually comes from really dysfunctional management or leadership that is demanding this type of hierarchy established. And so thinking about how are you joining in or not joining in that. If we want to move into a reciprocity that to understand and to retain information, we're really in the kind of learner or student mind. That one might be one way to think about how to listen. If we are focused more on critical listening, for that kind of factual stuff, we want to listen to the reasoning, what is the logic, or what is the evidence someone's providing, uh, how are they reaching their conclusion, and being kind of curious about how they're presenting their information, and their style. There's really no way for someone else to make someone else be curious about you, to make someone want to ask you questions. If I'm building this skill for you, it doesn't mean that every conversation you're going to be in, that someone's going to provide that back to you, that really more healthy dialogue reciprocity. And so the more that you start to do this, the more you're going to start to peer behind the curtain and see which conversations are actually more healthy and which ones aren't. And it might help you navigate who you want to do business with, who you want to work with, and think clearer about how are people showing up for you. Okay. So we talked about reciprocity. Let's talk about turn-taking signals next. So turn-taking signals is, when do you know it's your turn to talk? Are we just listening in a way to find our entry point? Okay, that is what I was looking for, and I'm going to jump right in, right? Whatever the motivation is or the intention of it, uh, there is cultural patterns, cultural scripts where people will overlap, which often sounds like interrupting. And if you're in an overlap, we're using volume as a turn-taking signal if someone starts mumbling and going down, or if someone jumps in at a higher volume. So this is one type of turn-taking signal. The other one is a pause. And I would say really establishing a culture of pauses or breaks in conversations is really good habits to establish. It's hard to do because we're supposed to be talking fast. In fact, I'm probably talking too slow for you, which is why if I upload this to YouTube, it's really wonderful. Then you can just kind of skip forward or put me on faster speed time. I'm definitely okay with whatever you need to do because our brains can take information in a lot faster, which is why we start filling in our preconceived notions of what someone's going to say. And then we jump in because we have decided what they're going to say already, and we already have our answer formulated. Or if we're waiting for the pause, are we just trying to think about what we're going to say? It gets really hard because someone will make a point, and if they're not in a true dialogue with us, someone's going to say something that, oh, I do have something to say about that. Okay, I'm waiting for my turn to talk. Oh, wait, they've switched topics completely. I don't want to forget what I was going to say to that other point, but now we're on a totally different topic. And they never even asked me my opinion. They never asked me what I thought about that idea. And I'm going to totally forget because now I'm trying to focus on what are they saying now on this point? Oh my God, now I can't remember what I was going to say. Right? It gets really frustrating. So we start trying to develop habits of jumping in to make our point because the person isn't making any room for us in the conversation. It's very frustrating if that's happening, especially in situations uh, we where the relationship is on the line, where our job is really vitally important. And I think developing norms, establishing expectations about conversations, if we have a point to make before someone's finished, how are we going to jump in and into the conversation? What is our turn taking signal? So are you from an overlap or a pause culture? Pause cultures, it can be everything from just the briefest pause that's barely a second, if a second, maybe half a second, a quarter of a second, to it can then last for minutes. And there's people who are really good at sitting in silence while they've listened to what you have to say, and then they want that breath of silence between from you finishing your point to when they talk to think through what they're going to say. And they're going to create their thinking time in the pause instead of while you're talking. And that is really valuable. For the cultures you can tell if someone comes from a culture where a pause is, or they don't want to be interrupted, they start increasing their volume, or they fill their pauses with sounds. I do that quite a bit. Ums, ahs. If you have to listen to these long enough, you're going to hear so many ums and ahs, right? Because I feel like if I get the microphone, I've been patterned in by my family. If I do get the microphone, so I'm not interrupted, I will make these sounds to show I'm still thinking. And I've developed that as a habit and a really bad habit for trying to give my tiny desk presentations. Thank you, pandemic, for making me watch myself. Sarcasm, if you weren't sure, a little sarcasm there. Okay. So, a little about me, turn-taking signals, pause or overlap. If you're the reason why people overlap in is often they get excited or enthusiastic about the point you're making, and a couple of people, two or three people who are overlapping, they might be like in a flow of brainstorming or ideas, and they're trying to get everything out. And that's great in some situations or contexts. This is one of the reasons why when we say if you have communication competency, you're understanding that context will drive which conversation tool or style you need to be using in a particular situation. So when I say these things, it doesn't mean you need to adopt them and this is the style no matter what. No, I am trying to open up your perceptions and your view of things in a different way. So now you can adapt and be flexible and appropriate to all of the contexts you might be able to use these tools in. Okay. So, what are some of those obstacles? Dun, 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 dun. Obstacles for us listening. Well, in communication, in the transactional model of communication, we have our communicators. We're sending messages, we're receiving messages, and we have different channels, meaning from nonverbals to our language and words to the setting we're in, that are impacting how we're decoding the messages. And then we have noise. Thank you, noise. There can be physical noise in the environment, right? We could have fans, white noise going on, air filtration systems making noise in the background. We could have traffic or landscaping equipment in the background so there's a lot of physical noise that could be coming in. But the noise I'm talking about is the noise I want to focus on is physiological noise and psychological noise. So physiological noise is any interruption with the health and functioning of our body that grabs our attention and focus and makes it harder for us to gauge as a listener. So we could be in pain. We could not be feeling well. We could be hungry, feel dehydrated. I mean, there's all sorts of things with the physical needs of our body that will show up at moments when we're supposed to be really listening and our attention gets grabbed into that, or we're in or especially people who deal with pain or any type of physicality that almost becomes like a filter that they have to sort through that noise to get to you and your message. So to think about that. The other type of noise is psychological. So when I talk about psychological noise, I'm talking about are the filters of culture, the filters of our distraction, right? Just like I talked about before with digital distractions, and the way we are conditioning to receive messages quicker and quicker. And when we're in our scrolling, we often are scrolling so fast, and we might even not watch the whole TikTok video or reel. We just move really quickly through information. And then all of a sudden we get to a conversation where someone is taking their time to explain their point of view. And we're used to fast forwarding or putting them on double speed in our digital formats that we've forgotten how to maintain concentration and patience in real life interactions. How are you working on developing the skill to be a slow listener? Maybe that's a way to say it. I'd love to hear what you think about ways that we develop that skill. Yay, not putting me on double speed. I'm developing but this isn't a conversation, so it doesn't really count. But yes, we're talking about in actual dialogues or conversation, right? Other psychological noises are our biases. We have our self-serving biases, implicit biases, confirmation bias, and other type of perception biases that are impacting how we're listening. So if I come into a conversation with a problem, when I come into, I'm going to come also with the solution. I'm going to just do that because I need to create some type of expectation or goal for the conversation. That's okay to do that, but I'm also going to be open and listen, and I'm not going to present my solution right out. I need to listen to the other person's perspective. I need to listen to where they're at and be almost an empathetic listener, a non-judgmental type of listener. And then as I develop the other person's perception of the problem, now I can, in dialogue, work towards a solution. Me coming with a solution in hand is just a way to be prepared to not fall into just groupthink or to lose my way or to lose my own perception, because that has value. But when I include others and other perceptions, I get a better idea of the problem. For example, with my husband, when we were first together, between the two of us, we had quite a few kids we were living with, and that caused a lot of problems. And I had a whole lot of solutions. But because I teach communication and I'm always trying to practice what I teach, because I need to always work on those skills as well, I would wait till we were in the car or at Costco. Costco was my favorite place to bring things up because it's not golfing, but it had good natural breaks. I knew my husband was going to he likes all the snacks. And there was time for us to pause and think. And I like that about our Costco problem solving conversations. And I would usually describe the problem and say, I'm seeing this as an issue. And then immediately I get the microphone into his court. Do you see this as a problem? I want to even know if he even thinks it's a problem. And then I want to know, I'm going to be asking questions. If he says, well, actually, I think that's fine. That's not a problem. And I'll say, well, I'm seeing it as a problem. What's the difference? Why are you not seeing it as a problem? Help me see it your way. And I'm in that learning, listening mode to get information. And then usually as we talk through it, because I already know what I want as the solution and I start getting his input, my solution starts changing and shifting. And as he starts saying, well, let's solve it. He wants to get into the problem solving mode. I'm going to take advantage of his need to want to come to my rescue. And then we can usually find a collaborative solution, and a collaborative solution that includes his perspective and my perspective, not one that is a compromise. We don't want to fall into compromise, because a compromise means I didn't get anything I needed and he didn't get anything he needed. We both lost, and that over time erodes trust. I want to collaborate. So that means we're going to be intertwining both of our perspectives, and we're going to move towards a solution together as a team. We want to be on the same team. If we're adversarial listeners, then if I'm like, oh, do you see this as a problem? And now I'm going to debate or I'm going to compete. And I'm just going to be, oh, of course you didn't see that as a problem because, and I'm going to fall into my biases of whatever those may be in that situation, right? So these are warning things, warning sign when we are in an adversarial listening role, to listen in a way that I'm going to punch holes through your argument, and I'm going to drag all your points down. I'm going to minimize, or I'm going to be dismissive. These are really dysfunctional, unhealthy conversation tactics. That is not critical listening. When we're just being in this kind of contemptuous adversarial place to minimize and dismiss. And that confirmation bias actually is the way that we are dismissive and minimizing of facts or information or other points of view that do not line up with our perspective. and that can be really harmful. Other things besides that are the kind of defensive listening, where we are just trying to manage our own identity in the conversation instead of really trying to move into that collaborative team space that usually comes from not being seen and not being heard when we fall into defensiveness or obviously aggression or attack on our identity or person or our personality or person, whatever makes up our identity. And we often can fall into the trap of moving into defensiveness to repair our identity. And so if you feel like you're falling into defensive listening, think about, what did the person say, or how has this relationship developed over time that I don't feel seen or heard, right? These are really painful places to be in our relationships when we do not feel included or seen. And we want to take note of that. Take note of that and think about how that is affecting your overall health or level of happiness or productivity in whatever work we're doing. Selective listening, pseudo listening, stage hogging. I have all these words kind of defined in this week's vocabulary list on our Canvas page, and there's a lot of good information about that. I think I don't need to go into them here, just to think about, what is the anatomy of the conversations that are in, and how are you showing up as a listener? Even if we can't change someone else's behavior, you can't. You can't force someone to listen to you, but you can start taking note of what type of listener you are, what has been effective for you in your relationships and in your productivity or success in the workplace, and start to uh, think about how you are showing up in a way to survive those conversations and maybe make some changes if you need them. All right. I hope this was helpful, and I'm looking forward to talking with you all in a dialogue. So maybe we'll get a chance to do that.